Josh, I think you lead us off on number 2, but Matt can run the numbers first.
All right. Rick James with Street Songs comes in at number 765 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 89 in 1981, number 5,030 of all time. And Rick James is our lowest ranked artist of the evening, coming in at number 3,025 of all time. Where are we getting this album from, John?
From his
Sorry,
pants.
you threw me off for a second. I was moving something. This was another fill-in, and I'm like, I think we need some funk, because I felt like we were a little too post-punky, and I wanted something that was outside of the realm of post-punk for a while.
So this is a John special, and I think this is the only Rick James album that we are covering, if I'm not mistaken. So,
correct, my friend.
Yep, right on. Okay, there you go.
Well, that's sad because this album rules. I love kind of an artist that makes a statement and that you know who they are right away, and not having really listened to Rick James outside of the most famous song on here. And I love kind of how this is also the closest artist to Prince that we've seen so far. I'm surprised I'm sure there's comparisons to each other, but I think
for sure
Rick James is he was around before Prince, right? Since you said this was
he was in a band with Neil Young.
Yeah, I was about to say he's been around throughout the whole 70s.
Oh, that's right.
Which was I kept thinking of it. I was like, I can't believe that these guys were in the same band together. It's so funny.
This is like Rick James's second or third career act. It's kind of like Bee Gees-esque, where there's like 2 acts before they become the Bee Gees, right? Mm-hmm. And there's like 2 acts before Rick James releases Super Freak, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, Super Freak is the most famous song on here, or if you're
there's some other big ones.
Yes, or if you're an MC Hammer fan, I guess you could pick that beat from that. But the I love how funky it is. I love how sexual it is, and like it in a like only a step down explicit way from Prince, I would say. Although there's a lot of crossover. I also love how kind of biographical it is, or at least confessional in a lot of respects. It's street songs. He's telling it like it is. The song Below the Funk, which is Past the J, which is the last song on the album. I think he's given a little kind of recap of his upbringing, the ghetto songs that was it Ghetto Life, I think. That's the second track. That's also seems biographical. I mean, there's a song Mr. Policeman. I think that he's writing about slice of life, if not to him, then to people he knows and to a certain segment of the population that has gone through those experiences. And that goes back to artists that we've talked about, in the past as well. And I really appreciate that. I think it's a unique perspective from this point, compared to the post-punk stuff that we've listened to and some of the other kind of British acts that we've talked about. They aren't writing songs in the same way that Rick James is writing these songs. And I wonder if it's maybe kind of an American distinction or a Black American distinction as to how to write songs. Maybe it's something with the funk genre that lends itself to that. But I had a real great time listening to this album. It's also incredibly short, which I appreciate. It's concise. It is like pound for pound, like one of the best albums that we've listened to in terms of getting in and out and having really great songs. There's no bad songs on this album, and he's got a great voice too. That's the other thing. It's powerful. It's singular. You know who it is right when he sings, and it's got range too. So I really appreciate that. Again, I didn't look up anything, so I don't know. I would imagine the kind of backing musicians on this album are also strong, or probably veterans in some form or fashion, especially since he's been around for so long. But maybe he played all the instruments. I don't know. But
I feel like I need to fill some stuff in from the bio because I was reading while you were doing it. So.
Yeah, go for it.
But I'll let you finish before I do that, though.
I mean, that's pretty much it. I enjoyed this album. I think it should be rated higher than it is. I mean, it's essential in my mind. It's Josh's essential albums to listen to before you die.
Okay. Well, to give you a little bit of a bio here on Rick James, I'll do this. So Rick James grew up in Buffalo, New York, which I think he references on the album at one point. Like, I was born in Buffalo, he says, which caught me off guard. I'm like, wow, he was? I would not have expected Buffalo. But he brings that up. And then he joined the Naval Reserves. He leaves the Navy, goes to Toronto, meets both Neil Young and Bruce Palmer, as well as one of the members of Steppenwolf. They're in the Mynah Birds, which Matt referenced all this one, but remember, they're the Mynah Birds.
Yeah.
They signed to Motown and record, though they never release their record. So then
that's sad. I would love to hear that.
Throughout the 70s, he's basically playing bass in various groups before he decides, to sign again with Motown for a second time. He signs a contract where he's an artist, a songwriter, and a producer. And in 78, he gets a single that tops the R&B charts and kind of is considered to be one of the last successful acts of Motown, and kind of sells well, and pretty much then does this album, Street Songs, which is his biggest selling album. It's a million-selling album. And then actually the next year, he produced The Temptations and kind of did their comeback album. Yeah. And he was working with a lot of the legends at Motown, like Smokey and the Temptations. I believe he also recorded that fantastic Eddie Murphy album as well, because he's definitely
Party All
the Time, yeah, and stuff like that. So that's a little bit of what Rick James was doing before he was on this album. He was 33 when this album was recorded, just FYI.
He was also doing a lot of coke.
Yeah,
he was. Well, I thought it was funny how you mentioned it was 89, because I'm like, it would have been more apropos if it was 69, I think, stuff like that. And also Josh said he really gets in and out, which I'm like, he would probably appreciate this, because this album is a funk album with maybe the ballad here and there, almost kind of to say you wrote one. I don't. The ballad's probably the weakest song on the album, but I would say this is a funk album about sex. And unlike Prince, who you mentioned, who sort of, you get the idea that sex with him is reciprocal, with Rick James, it is not reciprocal. It is basically him acquiring sex from as many women as possible. And so there's a persona, but I think, like many things, right, the persona bleeds into, the real person after a while, which can happen here. But much like Josh, I love this album. There's been... I think it's not a surprise. I've liked most of the funk albums we've listened to, whether it be Sly and the Family Stone. I had Isaac Hayes' Hot Buttered Soul as my favorite album of the 60s. And then we've done some stuff, the Prince album was plenty funky, all the Parliament stuff, in Funkadelic stuff we did, I was a fan of. So we've covered a fair amount, I would say, of funk all the time, and this would be in the higher tier of it for sure. You almost forget how good a song Super Freak is until you hear it in like the context of the album, because it's flying along nicely. I think if it was the first song, and don't get me wrong, Give It To Me Baby is a pretty iconic song in its own way. But when Super Freak just shows up at number 5, you're just like, holy crap, that just, this is just a walking hit. It's impossible.
It also opens the second side. Remember, in 81, it's the second side of the album. Yeah. So you flip it over, and then you get Super Freak. So it kind of is, in its own way, like a starter,
And and that's the producer in him. You know what I mean? I'm sure he knew. I'm sure he thought he had a good album here. And he stacked up, in my opinion, his 4 best songs, 1, 2, and 1, 2 on both sides of the track. Because, with the exception of the ballads, I was a fan of this album from start to finish. It was highly enjoyable. It was well recorded. It was fun. It's the type of album that even if you're not into funk, I'd be a little bit worried about who you are if you didn't at least involuntarily move a little bit to this album, because it's designed to make you move, and it's designed to be played in clubs. But it is it's club music that's post-disco club music. This is really the first time we're listening to an album that I think is like, listen to it in the club, in the 80s, and it not be sort of disco along the way. And it kind of bridges the gap between what would come in the club later in the late 80s and, mid to late 80s, right? The sound that's coming there, and a really synthesizer slick sound, and hip hop is coming later and stuff. This is sort of 80s funk and soul synthesized. It sounds both old and new at the same time. And so in 81, I would imagine it sounded both modern, but also a vestige to the funk that people had been listening through through the late 60s and 70s as well. And you can still, as we journey through this, you can kind of see where his progression comes from. So yeah, strong thumbs up for me on this one.
Yeah, of all the albums that we listened to this week, this one, there were several of them, particularly the newer ones that I didn't know, that I felt like I needed to listen to multiple times. This was not that. This was like, as soon as it came on, I'm like, all right, this is awesome. The first two tracks, Ghetto Life, that guitar part is just one of the best things I've heard of this whole podcast. It's just, yes, as soon as and I'm not the huge funk, either fan. Well, I can't say that I'm not a fan, because I do like the genre, but it's not something that I regularly listen to. But man, if you can't just get down with those first couple of songs, I don't know what to tell you. I'm with you there, John. It's just so infectious. It's very catchy. It's immediate. Like, this is the type of album that's going to hit you immediately. And unlike other albums that might do that, I don't think that this is going to take a while for this to lose its appeal upon multiple listens. I think that you could listen to this album many, many times and still enjoy it just as much, the 50th time around as you did the first. It's just, it's that good. I disagree with Josh, and I'm more aligned with John here. I do think there's clearly a weak song on here, and that's Fire and Desire. It's just, I'm
that
trying
was a single. I don't know what you're talking about.
It's a 7 minute. It's also by far the longest song, by almost double like the next longest song. It just reminded me of the guy from Coming to America, the Soul Glow guy. Like, you remember? So it's just like that, but it's that slow kind of ballad, and it's over the top, and it's just
bad Quiet Storm, like really bad Quiet Storm sound. For those that know what the Quiet Storm sound is.
Is that a sound?
It's like a R&B sound that's like a lovelorn ballad that sort of, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good Quiet Storm. Don't get me wrong. But Teddy Pendergrass, it's like that Teddy Pendergrass type sound, that's sort of like you're singing. I'm trying to think, like James Ingram. A lot of people we probably will not cover, but staples of R&B primarily designed for black listeners, like format in the radio, right? That was what Quiet Storm was, and that was, I feel like, Rick James's attempt to write like a Quiet Storm song. And
I just learned that. Yeah, it's
super successful.
It was super long, it's super drawn out, and just didn't do much for it. It definitely stood out in this album amongst all, like, just a bunch of other bangers, really, So, very funky. He's got a great voice. I love it when they put like the big hit in the middle of the album. It's just, or even towards the end sometimes. I like it when they do that to kind of, sometimes it's like giving you something to look forward to. Sometimes if you do all like the known stuff up front, then you're kind of like, I don't know, sometimes it's harder to keep the interest in, but yeah.
This wasn't the middle of the album. They were sequencing
Super Freak was in the middle of the album.
Yeah, but
it was the fifth song.
But what I'm saying is, when they sequenced, right, you had to turn the album, right? So it really wasn't
correct.
Sequenced
Yes,
in the middle of the album.
Okay, that's fair. Right? Yeah, but it's still something that if you do listen from top to bottom, it takes you 4 songs you got to listen to half the album before you get there. So I do like that, and the thing that makes that even better is the fact that you've got four songs ahead of it that are still really good.
Yeah.
So it is funny, like, just knowing Rick James. Actually, Sherry did a quick bio kind of thing earlier this evening just to check it out, and she says that according to Rick James, he lost his virginity at the age of like 9 or something, like 9 or 10 or something like that. And it's just like, and that fueled his desire just to sleep with lots of women and stuff. So it's funny, just it was like with a 14-year-old girl, so it's like somebody that's like 5 or 6 years older than him or whatever. But
it's sort of like that Prince song, right? That was kind of wasn't that?
Yeah, and that was even worse because that was his sister. Yeah, That was his sister. But yeah, like the songs like "Make Love to Me," "Give It to Me, Baby." Those are kind of funny, and "Fire Desires" kind of, like, or "Call Me Up." But then you've got the songs like, but then it's also about ghetto life and the policeman. I mean, those are more social commentaries than sexual, kind of things. From what I took, as the non-lyrics guy. But yeah, this is an easy thumbs up. I would just say for me, it's an easy skip track 6. Listen to everything else because it's just it's really catchy and it's good. I'm glad you put something on here like this, John, because it's definitely it stands out. It's its own thing, and it deserves to be covered and talked about. So I'm glad we covered it.
So here you go. Quiet Storm, if you want to hear a quick thing. Quiet Storm is a radio format and genre of R&B performed in a smooth, romantic, jazz-influenced style. It was named after the title song on Smokey Robinson's 1975 album A Quiet Storm. The radio format was pioneered in 1976 by Melvin Lindsay while he was an intern at the Washington, D.C. radio station WHUR-FM. It eventually became regarded as an identifiable subgenre of R&B. It was marketed to upscale, mature African-American audiences during the 80s while falling out of favor with young listeners in the age of hip-hop. So there you go.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I also, while you were saying that, I was reminded the horns in here are great too. I mean, that gives it an extra lively, pick-me-up kind of like, feeling to it. So there's lots of horns, which complemented a lot of the other stuff that they were doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. And there's a lot of funky bass lines, sexy bass lines in this album.
Tasty bass lines, John. Yeah.
Tasty's a different sound to me. These are
is it?
Like these are like sexualized bass lines.
I thought Tasty. I thought Tasty was just like any line for just a good bass line.
Yeah, I mean, there are some tasty sexualized bass lines here, but like I think of this bass line as more bedroom bass than it is maybe like
Give It to Me, Baby.
Virtuous. Well, in some ways, I feel like the bass scores the song, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. So if you want bass in a song called "Give It to Me," the bass should probably sound like what that sounds like, right? So it should be a thudding, pumping, unless you're doing it as a slow song, right? And then it could be like wow, wow, like basically, a different type of bass. But he's not writing he's not writing love songs, so it should be like a pounding song, So, yeah.
There you go.
He should have had an album called "Poundin' Songs."
He probably did.
I was about to say, just take a look at the catalog.
Street songs, pounding songs, Actually, he's got an album called "Throwing Down."
That's pretty close, right?
Come Get It with an exclamation mark. Garden of Love, busting out of
C-U-M or C-O-M-E.
Oh yeah, no, it's C-O-M-E. He's a little tasteful. Fire It Up. Yeah, he's
yeah, man.
Oh, James Brown.
Yeah, and let me throw
James. Sorry, James. I'm thinking James Brown. The other James Brown.
Let me throw out that "Mr. Policeman's" also a pretty awesome song, and it's a pretty good song lyrically too. So enjoyed that. Yep. So yeah, thumbs up for me for sure.
For sure. Yep.